to our webinar entitled 10 Years Later, What Have We Learned? The Psychological Impact of 9/11. We are delighted that you could join us today, and for those here in the live audience, good afternoon. I know there are people from all over the world, so good morning and good evening to all of you. My name is Feiruz Ben-Youssef, and I'm the CEO of Psychology Beyond Borders. And we are delighted this afternoon to have the co-sponsorship of many entities that you see here on the slide, and I want to personally acknowledge all of them. First, the New York State Psychiatric Institute and Columbia Department of Psychiatry, our hosts for this event. Also want to thank the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma. Our moderator is Bruce Shapiro, the Executive Director. Also want to thank the respective institutions of our three panelists, who all happen to be board members of PBB, the School of Social Ecology at UC Irvine, and then the National Center for PTSD, and again, Columbia Department of Psychiatry. And special thanks to Mindfire Inc., who have provided the technical assistance for this event. Without any further ado, I would like to turn it over to Bruce Shapiro, the Executive Director of the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma. Thank you.
Thank you. And to repeat the welcome to everyone here in the room at the New York State Psychiatric Institute in New York City, and on the web. I know there are participants in today's webinar from Canada, Australia, Finland, Mexico, Australia, and all kinds of places and time zones in between. This is a worldwide convocation on a very important occasion. We're here on an important anniversary here in New York City for those of us here, and indeed around the world, the 10th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, with the question embedded in the title of this webinar: what have we learned? The psychological impact of 9/11. There is a lot of talk, of course, and a lot of questions about the impact of 9/11. Some of it is political, or military, or cultural, or literary. We are fortunate here to be in the presence of three great and influential researchers who can answer in more specific and less speculative terms what has been the psychological impact of 9/11. I will introduce our panel in a few minutes. Let me just do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, as Feiruz said, I'm Bruce Shapiro. I'm the Executive Director of the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma, www.dartcenter.org, which is a project of the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism devoted to being a forum, think tank, and resource center for journalists who cover violence, conflict, and tragedy of any kind. This is an important anniversary for us, not just in general, but because in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th attacks, we put together a support program called DART Center Ground Zero, working closely with journalists who were among the first responders and first narrators of that event, an important occasion for us. Let me also do, for those of you in New York City, one quick bit of self-promotion. Abusing the chair for a minute. Two other September 11th related events, among many here at Columbia. The DART Center is sponsoring. Friday at noon, we will be hosting a lunchtime conversation with Jacques Manoche, a great magazine journalist and documentarian who's just completed an important project on the children of 9/11, the class of 9/11, looking through the eyes of his son's first grade classmates in Lower Manhattan. That's Friday. Next Wednesday, the 14th, 6 p.m. at the Columbia School of Journalism, psychiatrist and historian Robert J. Lifton will offer his reflections on 9/11 and many other issues in a public conversation. We look forward to some of you perhaps being there. let me take a quick poll, first of all, for those here in the room at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. Of you in the audience, how many were present or directly witnessed the 9/11 attacks? About a half dozen. How many of you had family or other loved ones who participated or witnessed the attacks? Another 8 or 9. How many of you have family members in the service who ended up overseas as a result of combat veterans? So between all of these hands, nearly everyone in this room has in one way or another been directly touched by the attacks, and we will remember that as this afternoon goes on. Let me do some housekeeping. First of all, format. I'll introduce our speakers in a moment. Each will present for 20 minutes on one or another of the psychology-related issues that we're dealing with today. And then there'll be 10 minutes of questions for those on the webinar, for those on the web. We would ask those of you in the audience to hold your questions until the end. So we'll do this sequentially. Each speaker, one after another. It's 20 minutes, 10 minutes of questions. Next speaker. This will take us until 4:15. At 4, which is 4:15 Eastern Time, U.S. At that point, the webinar will cease, and we'll continue the conversation here in the room with those of you physically present for the lecture. But this seems to be the best way of allowing questions from around the world to be organized and presented here and discussed. Continuing education credits. A number of people here in the audience and on the web have inquired about that. It's my understanding that Psychology Beyond Borders is negotiating with the American Psychological Association and the National Association of Social Workers to permit continuing education credits for this event. They will be in touch with you by email when that is resolved. I think that takes care of it for the housekeeping. Those of you in the room know where the exits are, and you know, if you need a break, you should take one. This is an important but sometimes difficult subject. Let me now introduce our panelists. I'm going to say a quick word about each of them, not go into their lengthy biographies. You can see that on the web, but just to give us a sense of the span of expertise we're dealing with. We are here with Roxanne Cohen-Silver, PhD, who's professor in the Department of Psychology and Social Behavior and the Department of Medicine at the University of California, Irvine. She has been a pioneering researcher for 30 years on long-term physical and psychological reactions to disasters and other traumatic events. She's also one of the founding directors of today's sponsor, Psychology Beyond Borders. We're especially happy for that. I've also was lucky enough to be present last year when Roxanne received the 2010 Public Advocacy Award from the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, which is one of only many awards she's received. Next to her is Yuval Neria, PhD, who's professor of clinical psychology at Columbia in both the departments of psychiatry and epidemiology, and the director of trauma and PTSD here at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He's edited a number of books. One of them sits proudly on my shelf right next to my desk down at the Journalism School, The Mental Health Consequences of Disasters, published by Cambridge University Press. He's also a novelist, and he's one of the great clinical researchers on the impact of large-scale violence, going back to his own experience in the Yom Kippur War, 1973. And finally, next to Yuval is Patricia Watson, PhD, the Senior Educational Specialist for the National Center for PTSD at White River Junction, Vermont, Assistant Director of Terrorism and Disaster Programs for the National Center for Child Traumatic Stress, an assistant professor at Dartmouth Medical School in the Department of Psychiatry. She is one of those who takes the important research and insights of clinicians and researchers and translates that into public education, public policy tools that help the world understand the sciences leading us in our understanding of events like 9/11. There's no logical or easy place to begin, so I'm just going to take our speakers in actually alphabetical order, I guess. Well, not quite alphabetical order, in the order in which they're on this pamphlet, just because they're here. On my immediate right, Roxanne Cohen-Silva, why don't you come up and get us started? 20 minutes and then 10 minutes of questions.